classes, this is the first and most important thing you got to do. You have to say good morning, unless of course it's afternoon. For the few people who I haven't met yet in the student body and the staff, you all know I am. But if we have not met, I am Rob Brown. I have the honor to lead the English department at Rice, and I have the distinct pleasure to be your host, if you will, your master of ceremonies this morning. Would ask that we begin, as we should begin everything, by recalling that we are in a holy place. People speak to God, they often speak in poetry, so let us recall that we are in the presence of God, in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Saint Caedmon of Whitby lived in the 7th century. On the northeast coast of England, he herded cattle belonging to the great abbey at Whitby. One night when the servants of the monastery were gathered in fellowship, the harp was being passed around. Caedmon, knowing nothing of poetry, left the company in shame. He retired to the stable, and there he had a vision of one who called him by name and bade him to sing. "I cannot," said Caedmon. "Sing to me," replied the heavenly visitor. "Sing of creation." And Caedmon began to sing in praise of God, verses which he had never heard before. And now, according to tradition in the church and in the English-speaking world, these are the words that Caedmon sang in a modern English translation. Let us pray. Now let me praise the keeper of heaven's kingdom, the might of the Creator and his thought, the work of the Father of glory, how each wonders the eternal Lord established in the beginning. He first created for the sons of men heaven as roof, the holy Creator, then middle earth, the keeper of mankind. The eternal Lord afterwards made the earth for men, the almighty Lord. Saint Caedmon of Whitby, singer of praise and first recorded poet in the English language. Pray for us. On behalf of the English Department of the Vermont Arts Council, the Poetry Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts, welcome to our annual Poetry Out Loud Assembly. This morning we come together to do something different. We hear friends and classmates recite poems, a process that began in classrooms in November, December, January, and a project that has involved nearly every one of you who's been there. You felt this. So here in a place designed for athletics, we come together for something very different. It's special. It's special for the poems and recitations you'll hear this morning, but it's also very special because of you folks. There are very few things that we can say only happen at Rice, and this is one. When I've traveled around the country speaking to groups of teachers in the advanced placement program, I tell them that every year we put the entire student body in the gym on bleachers for an hour or more, and they listen to people reciting poetry, and frankly, they don't believe me. Wish they could see it. You folks, in my experience, have always listened with amazing attention and with support so strong that you can almost feel it lifting up each speaker. As I say, folks don't believe it, but I tell them it's true. I see it every year, and it makes me very proud to be part of Rice. It makes me very grateful for your participation and support today. Now, the winner of today's competition will go on to compete in a regional contest in Barrie in early March. Regional finalists will gather in Colchester at Vermont PBS Studios for the state competition a week later. Vermont's winner flies to Washington, D.C. for a national competition in May. Now, we have a proud history here at Rice. We have sent people to the state competition on several occasions. A few years ago, we had a state champion go to DC from here. I'll tell you, we've never yet put national hardware in the trophy case, but who knows? Let's see what this morning brings. Our judges for this morning's school finals are members of the English department. Mary Goodrich Miller, Hunter Haig, Aaron Tinty. We're joined by a special guest judge, Mr. Patrick Welsh, wrangling the numbers. Who brought his fan club. And wrangling the numbers from the math department, our stalwart Paul DeFalco. I get the fun part. I get to introduce all these great recitations. So let me get to it. Our first poem was written by the Native American poet Natalie Diaz. Here's some trivia. I think she's the only poet, in fact I know she's the only poet in today's program to have ever played professional basketball. It was in Europe, it was in Asia, but it was professional basketball, and until somebody pays, it's significant. After her hoop career, she became a teacher and a poet, over to the dark side. I need to point out one thing, and that is that in the title, an abecedarian is something or someone that's related to alphabetical order. That may help you understand the poem. Here to present an abecedarian poem by Natalie Diaz is Abby Jakunski.
Abecedarian, requiring further examination of Anglican Seraphim subjugation of a wild Indian reservation, by Natalie Diaz. Angels don't come to the reservation. Bats, maybe, or owls, boxy, mottled things. Coyotes too. They all mean the same thing, death. And death eats angels, I guess, because I haven't seen an angel fly through this valley ever. Gabriel? Never heard of him. Know a guy named Gabe though. He came through here one powwow and stayed. Typical Indian. Sure, he had wings. Jailbird that he was. He flies around in stolen cars. Wherever he stops, kids grow like gourds from women's bellies. Like I said, no Indian I've ever heard of has ever been or seen an angel. Maybe in a Christmas pageant or something. Nazarene Church holds one every December, organized by Pastor John's wife. It's no wonder Pastor John's son is the angel. Everyone knows angels are white. Quit bothering with angels, I say. They're no good for Indians. Remember what happened last time some white god came floating across the ocean? Truth is, there may be angels, but if there are angels up there, they're better off in their own distant heavens. Fat and ugly. You better hope you never see angels on the res. If you do, they'll be marching you off to Zion or Oklahoma or some other hell they've mapped out for us.
Now I get to be here again for a few seconds while the judges mark their ballots, and I look for the high sign from the scorer's table. When I came to Rice as a prospective employee, that was 37 years ago, I was welcomed by the then head of the English department, Manfred Hummel. And he introduced me to the school, to the immediate neighborhood, and to his family, including his 8-year-old daughter, Maria. Now, Maria Hummel would later graduate from Rice. She would study at UVM. She moved to California, where she taught at a university you may have heard of, Stanford, something. And she has returned to Burlington She's returned to Burlington to UVM to occupy the chair in creative writing left by her teacher and mentor, David Huddle. And I am thrilled to be able to introduce this poem by Maria Hummel, recited by Connor Willett.
Recess by Maria Hummel. This is the sound of the bell. Full of brass and the end it brings. Once for the children, once for the child, who sits alone, his eyes hurt and mild. He waits holding his things. Time should have no meaning for him yet. You don't learn how to play, you forget, but he knows a while well and longs for the sound of the bell. A bell is a room of nothing. No, a dome with a hidden swing. A will, a sway, a tone, a peal. The beginning of song. The wild crowd nears, passes, laughing. Here is the sound of the bell.
Love it when we can take poetry personally. It's such a personal medium. One of the first influential African-American poets in our nation's literature, his name was Paul Laurence Dunbar. He combined a high level of technical mastery of traditional poetic styles and a deeply, deeply felt sense of Black identity. Dunbar's poetry is rich, it's diverse, it's complex, and I recommend it to you for your reading bucket list. Like so many people, I think, Dunbar died too young. He died at the age of 33 of complications of respiratory ailments and, sadly, alcoholism. Here to recite The Paradox, one of Dunbar's memorable poems, is Fred Poland.
Paradox by Paul Laurence Dunbar. I am the mother of sorrows. I am the ender of grief. I am the bud and the blossom. I am the late falling leaf. I am thy priest and thy poet. I am thy serf and thy king. I cure the tears of the heartsick. When I come near, they shall sing. White are my hands as a snowdrop. Swart are my fingers as clay. Dark is my frown as the midnight. Fair is my brow as the day. Battle and war are my minions. Doing my will is divine. I am the calmer of passions. Peace is a nursling of mine. Speak to me gently or curse me. Seek me or fly from my sight. I am thy fool in the morning. Thou art my slave in the night. Down to the grave will I take thee, out from the noise of the strife. Then shalt thou see me, death then no longer, but life. Then shalt thou sing at my coming. Kiss me with passionate breath. Clasp me and smile to have thought me. Ought save the foeman of death. Come to me, brother, when weary. Come when thy lonely heart swells. I'll guide thy footsteps and lead thee down where the dream woman dwells.
Our next poet is James L. Dickey. He's a member of my parents' generation and therefore a poet who came into his own when I was a student. One of my great teachers from college, a gentleman named Benjamin DeMott, praised Dickey for what he called in-touchness, the ability to rise, as Professor DeMott put it, out of the habitual half-lived life. To rise up out of a life half-lived. I will leave it to you to see if that quality emerges in this next recitation of James L. Dickey's The Hospital Window, presented by Isabel Rossi.
The Hospital Window by James L. I've just come down from my father. Higher and higher he lies above me in a blue light shed by a tinted window. I drop through 6 white floors and then step out onto pavement. Still feeling my father ascend, I start to cross the firm street, my shoulder blades shining with all the glass the huge building can raise. Now, I must turn round and face it, and know it is one pain from the others. Each window possesses the sun, as though it burned there on a wick. I wave like a man catching fire. All the deep-dyed window panes flash, and behind them, all the white rooms, they turn to the color of heaven. Ceremoniously, gravely, and weakly, dozens of pale hands are waving back from inside their flames. Yet, one pure pain among these is the bright, erased blankness of nothing. I know that my father is there, in the shape of his death still living. The traffic increases around me like a madness called down on my head. The horns blast at me like shotguns, and drivers lean out, driven crazy. But now, my propped up father lifts his arm out of stillness at last, and the light from the window strikes me, and I turn as blue as a soul as the moment when I was born. I'm not afraid for my father. Look, he is not afraid for my life either, as the wild engines stand at my knees, shredding their gears and roaring, and I hold each car in its place for miles, inciting its horn to blow down the walls of the world, that the dying may float without fear in the bold blue gaze of my father. Slowly, I move to the sidewalk, with my pin-tingling hand half dead. At the end of my bloodless arm, I carry it off in amazement. High, still higher, still waving, my recognized face fully mortal, yet not. Not at all. In the pale, drained, otherworldly, created hue of stained glass, I have just come down from my father.
Was it William Wordsworth said about poetry? It's the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Very few modern writers have achieved such kind of everyday fame among ordinary people as the poet Maya Angelou. Her most famous work, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, a book that many of you are likely familiar with, contains a story about a traumatic experience in childhood and how it made her stop talking 5 years. Something that ultimately taught Angelou the importance and the wonder of language. Our next poem, The Mothering Blackness, illustrates the power of this great African-American poetic voice. The poem is recited by Belize Ivan.
The Mothering Blackness by Maya Angelou. She came home running, back to the mothering blackness, deep in the smothering blackness. White tears icicle gold plains of her face. She came home running. She came down creeping,
Here, to the black arms waiting. Now, to the warm heart waiting. Rime of alien dreams befrost her rich brown face. She came down creeping. She came home blameless. Black, yet as Hagar's daughter. Tall, as was Sheba's daughter. Threads of northern winds die upon the desert's face. She came home blameless.
I should point out to our guests, as well as my colleagues who may not have followed Poetry Out Loud through its early stages this year, but for those of you who are not part of this day in and day out, you need to understand that every student pretty much on these bleachers today did what their classmates are doing before us right now. They've all been there, they've all done that. Everyone has taken part in this recitation of a poem, and this is what has risen to the top. Now, Miss Anelli reminded me yesterday that the Poetry Out Loud competition was begun by one of America's premier English teachers, a gentleman named Dana Gioia. In his book, which is wonderfully titled, Can Poetry Matter? I would answer that yes, by the way. Gioia describes our next poet, Ted Kooser, as a popular poet, not one who sells millions of books, but popular in the sense that, unlike most of his peers, he writes naturally for a non-literary public. That's real ordinary people, and it underscores what I think this event's all about, is that poetry is really for everyone. See if that applies to this poem as you hear it. Ted Kooser's Abandoned Farmhouse, recited by Sam Thompson.
Abandoned Farmhouse by Ted Kooser. He was a big man, said the size of his shoes on a pile of broken dishes by the house. A tall man, too, says the length of his bed in an upstairs room. A good God-fearing man, says the Bible with a broken back below the window, dusty with sun. But not a man for farming, says the fields cluttered with boulders and the leaky barn. A woman lived with him, says the bedroom walls papered with lilacs and the kitchen shelves covered with oilcloth. And they had a child, says the sandbox made from tractor tire. Money was scarce, says the jars of plum preserves and canned tomatoes sealed in the cellar hole, and the winter's cold, say the rags in the window frames. It was lonely here, says the narrow country road. Something went wrong, says the house in the weed-choked yard. The stones in the fields say he is not a farmer, and the still-sealed jars in the cellar say she left in a nervous haste, but what of the child? Its toys strewn in the yard like branches after a storm. A rubber cow, a rusty tractor with a broken plow, and a doll in overalls. Something went wrong, they say.
I would imagine that most people here at Rice have heard of our next author, Nathaniel Hawthorne. That's anybody past sophomore year, right? He's the guy with the scarlet letter, created Hester Prynne, the straight A student. Okay, that was lame. Point is that few people, if any, really recognize Hawthorne as a poet. He's a novelist. He's a gloomy novelist. He's all about guilt and hidden sin stuff. I confess that his verse is relatively new to me. It was until I saw our next poem. The poem is called The Ocean, and it's recited by Charlotte dos Santos.
The Ocean by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The ocean has its silent caves, deep, quiet, and alone. Though there be fury on the waves, beneath them there is none. The awful spirits of the deep hold their communion there, and there are those for whom we weep, the young, the bright, the fair. Calmly the wearied seamen rest beneath their own blue sea. The ocean's solitudes are blessed, for there is purity. The earth has guilt, the earth has care, unquiet are its graves. But peaceful sleep is ever there, beneath the dark blue waves.
Learning anything yet? Thanks. You're going to discover that a lot of the people writing terrific poetry right now may not be very well known among you until long after you leave school. That's a prediction, and I know it's the safe one. That's the way it was for our next poet. Her name is Linda Pastan. She produced a lot of her best work in the years while I was in college and in grad school, and therefore really didn't know much about her other than the fact that she was sort of an interesting new poet. And it's been kind of fun in the last 15 years to see her start turning up in all the anthologies. Keep that in mind as someone is introduced to you as one of those new poets, and you say, yeah, whoever. And you just suddenly discover as you reach adulthood and later that, oh, of course, I heard of them too. Well, Linda Pastan is now in almost every serious anthology. Her poem, Obligation to Be Happy, is recited for us by Maya Farrow.
The Obligation to Be Happy by Linda Pastan. It is more onerous than the rights of beauty or housework, harder than love. But you expected of me casually, the way you expect the sun to come up, not in spite of rain or clouds, but because of them. And so I smiled, as if my own fidelity to sadness were a hidden vice. That downward tug on my mouth, my old suspicion that health and love are brief irrelevancies, no more than laughter in the warm dark, strangled at dawn. Happiness. I tried to hoist it on my narrow shoulders again, a knapsack heavy with gold coins. I stumble around the house, bump into things. Only Midas himself would understand.
Okay, I have a confession to make. I know very little about our next poet. So I will dodge the occasion. I'll take this opportunity to thank all of my colleagues on the faculty for support and cooperation in this. It is difficult to give up minutes and of instructional time and to put up with changing in schedule and so forth. So I appreciate your help. Also to the administration, thank you for trusting that we know how to do this and that good things will happen from it. And also I thank you guys for your patience for this little prattle between recitations while our doughty judges do their doughty best. Now, my best guess, this is a poet about whom I know very little. So my best guess, first of all, is how to pronounce his name. which I believe rhymes with alley. His name is John Stralley. If it turns out to be something else, I'm sure I will hear from someone eventually. The other thing I know about him is that he is much better known as an author of detective novels than he is of poetry. This is what I found out when I tried to look him up in the poetry database. All the references were to detective novels. Go figure. So, our next poet is John Stralley, and the poem is Every Single Day, and it's recited by Beatrice Schlonsky.
Every Single Day by John Stralley, after Raymond Carver's Hummingbird. Suppose I said the word springtime, and I wrote the words King Salmon on a piece of paper and mailed it to you. When you opened it, would you remember that afternoon we spent together in the yellow boat, when the early whales were feeding and we caught our first fish of the year? Or would you remember that time off Cape Flattery, when you were a little girl, your father smoking, telling stories as he ran the boat, then the tug and zing of that very first fish spooling off into the great green world, you laughing and brushing back your hair before setting the hook again? I know I am hard to understand sometimes, particularly when you are standing at the post office with only a piece of paper saying King Salmon on it. But just think of it as a promissory note, and that electric tug, that thrill, pulling your mind into deep water, is how I feel about you every single day.
Notice how a great poem has a way of reeling you in. Yeah, that wasn't a line. That's a good observation. Now, I've been overseeing or welcoming Poetry Out Loud for a number of years. It's not uncommon to have more than one recitation of the same poem in a school-wide competition. People make their choices, people recite their poems, they do so in the classroom without really paying attention to who else is doing what elsewhere. Fine minds think alike. And great poems are just that, they're great poems. So, here's today's Daily Double. It comes with a twist as it involves rice twice. Once again, it is time for recess. No, sit down. Okay, I planned that. It's time for recess by our own distinguished alumna and my former student, Maria Hummel. The recitation is by Marianne Poland.
Recess by Maria Hummel. This is the sound of the bell. It rings full of brass in the end it brings. Once for the children, once for the child who sits alone. His eyes hurt and mild. He waits, holding his things. Time should hold no meaning for him yet. You don't learn how to play. You forget. But he knows a while well and longs for the clang of the bell. A bell is a room full of nothing. No, a dome with a hidden swing, a will, a sway, a tone, a peal, the beginning of a song. The wild crowd nears, passes, laughing. Here is the sound of the bell.
Well, the next poet in this cavalcade of verse, if you want to call it that, was the first member of his family to go to college. He was also the first male in his family not to work in the coal mines. He's from East St. Louis, Illinois. Robert Wrigley has said that poetry can have a redemptive function. It can look at the chaos you see and make a kind of sense of the smallest part of it. I kind of like that philosophy, because it underlies the usefulness of this stuff called poetry, even its necessity at times in our lives. Robert Wrigley's poem, After a Rainstorm, is next, and it's recited by Sarah Beth Maricklin.
After a Rainstorm by Robert Wrigley. Because I have come to the fence at night, the horses arrive, also from the ancient stable. They let me stroke their long faces, and I note, in the light of the now emerging moon, how they, a morgan and a quarter, have been by shake-gutted raindrops, spotted around their rumps, and thus made Appaloosas, the ancestral horses of this place. Maybe because it is night, they are nervous. Or maybe because they too sense what they have become. They seem to be waiting for me to say something to whatever ancient spirits might still abide here, that they might awaken from this strange dream in which there are fences and stables and a man who doesn't know a single word they understand.
You folks have been wonderful, and you know, I think you've been very supportive. I hope you've been listening, because, no, not quite a quiz, but this will throw back. I will ask you to remember back at the start of the hour when I noted that the poet, Natalie Diaz, played professional basketball. You remember that? Good. Our next poet did not play professional basketball. He never turned pro, but he did play college ball. So that's sort of by connection. Played in college. Stephen Dunn went to Hofstra on a basketball scholarship, and then he surprised absolutely no one when he became a writer of advertising, for that matter. One reviewer characterizes Stephen Dunn as a regular guy who happens to have an understanding of human nature more subtle than perhaps he might prefer. It's kind of a nice little complicating twist. Stephen Dunn's poem, Sweetness, will be recited by Emma Trombley.
Sweetness by Stephen Dunn. Just when it has seemed I couldn't bear one more friend waking with a tumor, one more maniac with a perfect reason, often a sweetness has come and changed nothing in the world except the way I stumbled through it. For a while lost in the ignorance of loving someone or something, the world shrunk to mouth size, hand size, and never seeming small. I acknowledge there is no sweetness that doesn't leave a stain, no sweetness that is ever sufficiently sweet. Tonight, a friend called to say his lover was killed in a car he was driving. His voice was low, guttural. He repeated what he needed to repeat, and I repeated the one or two words we have for such grief until we were speaking only in tones. Often, a sweetness comes as if on loan, stays just long enough to make sense of what it means to be alive, then returns to its dark source. As for me, I don't care where it's been or what bitter road it's traveled, to come so far, to taste so good.
Now then, I feel like we're doing exam review again. Edward. Earlier this morning we heard a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar. You remember that? Well, our next poet was his wife for a while. Somewhat briefly, marriage lasted from 1898 to 1902. Okay, just don't let anybody tell you that we avoided the tabloid part of Poetry Out Loud. Got that? Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson. Plenty of names. She had a mixed heritage, African American, Anglo, Native American, Creole. Here is a noteworthy woman's voice from the early 20th century. Her poem, I Sit and Sew, is presented by Dina John.
I Sit and Sew by Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson. I sit and sew, a useless task it seems. My hands grown tired, my head weighed down with dreams. The panoply of war, the martial tread of men, grim-faced, stern-eyed, gazing beyond the ken of lesser souls whose eyes have not seen death, nor learned to hold their lives but as a breath. But I must sit and sew. I sit and sew, my heart aches with desire, that pagan terrible, that fiercely pouring fire on wasted fields and writhing grotesque things once men. My soul in pity flings appealing cries, yearning only to go there. In that holocaust of hell, those fields of woe, but I must sit and sew. The little useless seam, the idle patch. Why dream I here beneath my homely thatch, when there they lie in sudden mud and rain, pitifully calling me, the quick ones and the slain. You need me, Christ. It is no roseate dream that beckons me. This pretty fetal seam, it stifles me. God, must I sit and sew? Thank you.
Doing great. Now, if you come across the writing of Paul St. Vincent or Sally Goodman, be aware that these two authors are actually the same person. And neither of them are really Paul St. Vincent or Sally Goodman. They are actually someone, or he or she is, you know, someone else. Paul St. Vincent and Sally Goodman are really pen names of Edward Archibald Markham, who is an English poet born in the West Indies, educated in Wales, and long associated with the Caribbean region. Kind of got around. Our next poem is by E.A. Markham. It's titled A History Without Suffering. It's recited by Abby Jones.
A History Without Suffering by E.A. Markham. In this poem, there is no suffering. It spans hundreds of years and records no deaths, connecting when it can those moments where people are healthy and happy, content to be alive, a chapter, maybe a volume shorn of violence, consists of an adult reading aimlessly. This line is the length of a full life, smuggled in while no one was plotting against a neighbor except in jest. Then, after a gap, comes Nellie. She is in a drought-fisted field with a hoe. This is her 12th year on the land, and today her back doesn't hurt. Catechisms of self-pity and of murder have declared a day's truce in the civil war within her. So today, we can bring Nellie, content with herself, with the world, into our history. For a day. In the next generation, we find a suitable subject, camping near the border of a divided country. For a while, no one knows how near. For these few lines, she is ours. But how about the lovers, you ask? The freshly washed, body close to yours, sounds, smells, tastes. The anticipation of the young, the edited memory of the rest of us. How about thoughts higher than their thinkers? Yes, yes. Give them half a line and a mass of footnotes. They have their own privileged history, like inherited income beside our husbandry. We bring our history up to date in a city like London. Someone's just paid the mortgage, is free of guilt, and not dying of cancer, and going past the newsstand doesn't see a headline advertising torture. This is all recommended reading, but in small doses. It shows you can avoid suffering if you try.
The order of presentations in Poetry Out Loud, if you're wondering, it was determined by a random drawing with one exception. And that one exception is our last presentation. In past years, when we've had a returning school-wide champion, it's been our custom to have that person present last, give the honor of the last word, so to speak. And so it is. Her poem is by Henrietta Cordelia Ray, a 19th century African-American writer whose work has found a new audience in the 21st century. My students will know that I find these people kind of interesting. People who maybe did not matter too much in their own day, but who found popularity in a much later time, and that is the case with Henrietta Cordelia Ray. She was a teacher, which also makes her kind of special in my book. Her poem, Limitations, is recited by Tracy Ferguson.
Limitations by Henrietta Cordelia Ray. The subtlest strain a great musician weaves cannot attain in rhythmic harmony to music in his soul. May it not be celestial lyres send hints to him? He grieves that half the sweetness of the song he leaves unheard in the transition. Thus do we yearn to translate the wondrous majesty of some rare mood when the rapt soul receives a vision exquisite. Yet, who can match the sunset's iridescent hues? Who sing the skylark's ecstasy so seraphine? We struggle vainly. Still, we fain would catch such rifts amid life's shadows, for they bring glimpses ineffable of things divine.
so glad that I'm up here and not over there judging this. You can see Mr. Welch thinking, I only have to pick the top 15, right? Can we all give a major round of applause? Stall for just a second while our judges complete their tabulations. I'm going to get a high sign from Mr. DeFalco and the accounting firm of Price Waterhouse. They've got kind of a bad name right now. And we will be able to announce the names of our winner and runner-up. I'd also like you to, if you would, allow yourselves a round of applause. You guys are fantastic. I said it at the outset, and I'll say it again. This is the only place in the world. No more phone calls. We have here. You're going to... Okay. Talk among yourselves.
Just hold that. I'll go with your choice.
Yeah. They're sending this back to New York. Seriously. While a brief deliberation is taking place, let me brief you guys as to what's going to happen. When we dismiss, I'm going to ask that our competitors remain behind for what's politely referred to as a photo op, a little grip and grin. We'll ask that everyone else proceed quietly back to your third period class, from which you will be dismissed shortly when the bell rings and things happen. So that's kind of the direction in which we're going. And no. Yes, no. Can you feel the tension? You guys can feel the tension, but...
I don't want to know how, don't need to know how it was going. All good.
Okay. In the event that our school champion is unable to compete in the regional or statewide competition, we will be ably represented by our runner-up, Dina John. It gives me great pleasure to announce that Rice will be represented in the regional and state competition, we hope, by Tracy Ferguson. And with that, I'm going to ask our competitors to remain, and with the permission of Mr. Adams, okay? Off you go, third period.